I'm Carson Horn, and it's time for another edition of Talkin' Tumors, where I break down the latest happenings in Auburn athletics. Let's get rolling. Do you ever just sit and think about how future generations might look at the time that we're living in right now? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but for me, I often think about that. Maybe I'm weird for doing that, but I often think about what would the future generation think about what's going on in college athletics right now. Yes, that is really specific, but I truly believe we are living through an historic time in collegiate athletics, and I don't know what's coming on the other side. I do think eventually we're going to get some type of era that is more stable, and we'll eventually be able to move past the chaos that we are in right now. But man, it feels like we're in the middle of the hurricane and we are not getting out of it anytime soon. I'm going to talk about all of that today and how that pertains to Auburn in particular, because obviously this is Talking Tumors. I am Carson Horn, and this is an Auburn show. So that is what we're going to talk about, is how these changes might affect Auburn moving forward in the immediate future and in the more long-term future. We also have to talk about Auburn football and how a possible matchup against Oklahoma is looking in Week 4. It's not a possible matchup. It will occur in Week 4. We'll look at the keys maybe for that game, some key players to watch, some big storylines to watch. Yes, I know it's still only May, but we are continuing our summer opponent preview, and we'll move on to Oklahoma on this week's show. We'll talk about Auburn basketball and the decisions that still need to be made for Todd Pettiford and for possible other additions to Auburn's roster. We'll talk about Auburn golf. Their season just ended as we are speaking here on this Tuesday afternoon. Moments ago, Auburn golf fell to Virginia in the quarterfinals of the NCAA National Championship tournament. We will break down their season. We'll also look at Auburn baseball. Auburn baseball is hosting a regional this weekend at Plainsman Park for the third time in the last 4 years. We'll dive into that and talk about the keys for Auburn to come out of that regional and advance to the Super Regionals. So plenty to get into on today's show. Very much looking forward to it. Hope you all are doing well, and appreciate so much for you all listening or watching the show, whether you're listening to podcasts or watching it on YouTube. Thank you very, very much, and humbly ask that you could please subscribe to the show if you haven't already, and give it a like as well if you're watching on YouTube. Okay, let's dive in now. So, if you weren't paying attention to the news last week, if you were on vacation, if you just don't follow this that closely, but you just watched or listened to this show, well, one, I thank you for doing that. And number two, let me update you on what has occurred. So, last week, the college football commissioners of the power conferences and all the commissioners in general agreed to change the playoff format for this upcoming season, the 2025-2026 season. This year, the college football playoff will be a straight seeding model. It's still going to be 12 teams, but it's going to be straight seeding. What do I mean by that? It means they're going to rank the top 12 teams from best to worst. Unlike this past season, where you had the 4 highest ranked conference champions getting a bye, as well as you had to rank the teams based on their conference champions. So even your top 5 conference champions were going to be your top 5 seeds, and your top 4 teams were going to get a bye. And that is not going to be the case this season. Yes, your 5 conference champions, 4 of your Power 4, and your 1 Group of 5 champion will automatically get a bid into the college football playoff still. However, they do not have to be ranked inside the top 4. They can be ranked wherever within the top 12. This is a positive thing. You all know how I feel about college football playoff expansion, how I didn't like it going to 12, how I certainly don't like it continuing to expand. But for where we are at now, this is a positive move. This is a good thing. We would have gotten better matchups, I believe, last season in the college football playoff if this format had been the one we used last season instead of the auto bid structure, where you ended up having Oregon really have a tough draw, having to play Ohio State after getting the bye, and so forth and so on. Those other examples there. We would have gotten better games more than likely. So this is a positive. But you might not care about that. You might care, though, how does this pertain to Auburn? Will this benefit Auburn? Will this hurt Auburn? This benefits Auburn in my eyes. But there's a caveat. If strength of schedule is properly weighted. Now, some of you are already shooting back your comments and already disagreeing with me. So let me address what is the biggest argument to the strength of schedule. People who, and it may not be many of you listening, many of you are Auburn fans, so you're fans of the SEC more than likely. But many people who are not fans of the SEC, they're maybe fans of an ACC, a Big 12, or even Big 10 team, push back on that and say the SEC believes that their schedule is a lot tougher than it actually is, and winning games have to matter. Losing close games shouldn't matter. And Greg Sankey spoke on this at the SEC meetings already this week, discussing strength of schedule and how it has to factor in more. I agreed with the College Football Playoff Committee leaving out South Carolina, Alabama, and Ole Miss last season. Ole Miss and Alabama both had terrible losses. Ole Miss had a loss to Kentucky. Alabama had a loss at Vanderbilt. And then South Carolina lost to both Ole Miss and Alabama. So they struggled to get a big-time win besides their win at the end of the season against Clemson. So I'm not trying to rehash all of that. I'm just trying to make the point that strength of schedule does need to matter, but last year I did believe they got it right. So if they continue to get it right and they do value strength of schedule, and if next season, let's say in a perfect world that Auburn has a really good season, they go 9-3. Let's say Auburn loses to Georgia and loses a couple other games. They beat Alabama, and maybe their two other losses come to one to an 8-4 team and maybe to a 10-win team somewhere on that schedule. But Auburn goes 9-3 overall with the win over a really good Alabama team and some other teams in there. Does Auburn deserve to get in? Without knowing the rest of the field, more than likely they would if you properly weight Auburn's strength of schedule, which, again, like any team in the SEC, is going to be extremely challenging. If that is the case, then Auburn will be in the college football playoff, and I think Auburn will benefit from a 12-team straight seeding format versus the auto bid structure. But it doesn't really change things that much overall. So I make that point. However, I would argue with the 5 teams still getting in, even your group of 5 champions still getting in, even if they're outside the top 12. So it'll help a little bit, but if you really wanted to go with the 12 best teams, you would not have the automatic bids for the group of 5, or the automatic bid for the group of 5, or maybe even for an ACC or Big 12 champion, although more than likely those teams will be deserving to get in as well. So this new format benefits Auburn more than it hurts Auburn, yes. However, I don't think it makes a huge difference one way or the other. And again, we're talking in a hypothetical world where Auburn has a incredible season that may be hard for some of you to picture at the moment. We're talking about a world where Auburn has a really good season and deserves to be in the playoff. With this format, I do think it benefits Auburn. Okay, moving on now, continuing to talk about college athletics and the changes to college athletics. I wanted to address a question that we've talked about from time to time on the show, but I wanted to talk about it again because things continue to evolve, and they evolve very quickly. Decisions are being made in collegiate athletics. So, I wanted to pose this question. What does the shifting landscape of collegiate athletics mean for Auburn? So currently, right now, as we record this show on Tuesday afternoon, the SEC meetings are taking place in Destin. There's going to be a lot of hot topics going on there. NIL, the playoff, the new playoff structure. We were just discussing that. But they're also going to be discussing the playoff structure for down the road in the future seasons, as well as even possibly breaking away from the NCAA. So this really isn't going to feel like a vacation for the administrators, the coaches, the athletic directors, Commissioner Greg Sankey, all of those that are part of SEC universities that are down there in Destin. This really is probably more of a stressful week than a vacation week for those involved. And let's start out. I want to go through each topic one by one. And I'm not going to bore you with the details because I understand that not all of you are nerds about the changing landscape of collegiate athletics like I am. But I do believe many of you care a little bit about it, and you do care how it might affect Auburn. You don't necessarily care about how it's going to get there. You want to know the end game, which I completely understand. The problem is we don't necessarily know the end game yet. So all I can do is give you my best guess, educated guess on where things are likely headed and how it might affect Auburn. So let's start with the first topic here. What if the SEC leaves the NCAA? That would be a big deal. That would be a huge deal. This is something that's been talked about for a lot of years, something many folks have advocated for. It's a complicated process. We know, and you know, that I'm not a huge fan of the NCAA. However, I've also realized that there Their hands are tied at this point. There's not much they have been able to do to enforce rules, and they're stuck. Now, as I've said many times before, the NCAA should have taken initiative years ago before things got out of hand. They chose to sit on their hands, and then we got ourselves in the mess that we are in now. So that doesn't absolve them from blame, but as things stand currently, there's not much they can do. And the SEC understands that. The SEC also understands they're extremely powerful, and they would like to have more power over themselves. And I think that is why the SEC is considering leaving the NCAA along with the Big Ten and possibly other conferences. So let's go into a world where this happens. How does this affect Auburn? Auburn's going to be fine. Even if the NCAA completely disbands and everyone's out on their own, as long as Auburn's in the SEC, and that's not going to change, Auburn is going to be in the SEC, Auburn's going to be fine because Auburn's going to have the support and the resources of a major conference and a conference that draws plenty of TV revenue and deals. Auburn will never be lacking. So, will the SEC leave the NCAA? I don't know, but I do know that no matter what, if the NCAA stays together and the SEC stays a part of it, or if the SEC goes out on its own, Auburn's going to be fine either way. Number two, what if the lack of order remains in NIL? How would this affect Auburn? Auburn is in a position to survive. I wouldn't necessarily say that Auburn's in a position to thrive in this era, although Auburn has done very, very well in the NIL era, thanks to a lot of boosters and supporters and alumni who have really supported Auburn football and Auburn basketball and baseball and so forth and so on. But Auburn's not Texas. Auburn's not Texas A&M. Auburn's not Ohio State or even Tennessee. Auburn, at the end of the day, is still lower on the totem pole than those folks go when it comes to money and support and so forth and so on. However, Auburn is still in the upper echelon. Auburn is still, as I just mentioned, an extremely powerful conference, the most powerful conference in collegiate athletics. And Auburn does have fantastic support from the folks I just mentioned. Because of that, if the disorder remains, if we continue to have this pay-for-play system where the market continues to go up and up and up, and we're looking at rosters that continue to increase, whereas the biggest roster last year was around $20 million. Now you're looking at $40 to $50 million rosters this upcoming season. You're looking at basketball rosters around $20 million. Auburn can compete in that era. Auburn will not thrive in that era. Auburn does not have unlimited resources, and no one does. But Auburn is not in that top tier. Auburn is in the upper echelon. So, Auburn can do well. Auburn can succeed. Auburn can win championships. I do believe that, even if this era without any really rules and regulations continue. But is it the best thing for Auburn? I don't think so. I don't think Auburn is built to be able to compete at the tip top year in and year out with the way things are currently structured. And then finally, how could future playoff formats affect Auburn? So right now, as we stand here today on this Tuesday afternoon, May 27th, the most likely playoff format seems to be a 16-team playoff. This is in 2026 and beyond, not this upcoming season. Wanted to note that. We talked about the likely playoff scenario at the start a few minutes ago. So how would this affect Auburn? If the college football playoff decides to go with 16 teams and the SEC and Big Ten sign off on this, and that is the way college football goes in the upcoming years, how would this affect Auburn? This proposed format, the most likely format right now, is a 4 plus 4 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 3. You probably have no clue. Carson, what in the world? Is that a math equation? What are you talking about? So let me explain that to you. The 4 teams for the SEC, plus 4 teams for the Big Ten, plus 2 teams from the Big 12, plus 2 teams from the ACC, plus 1 group of 5 team, and then plus 3 is 3 at-large bids. So this playoff format would guarantee 4 automatic bids for the SEC and the Big 10, 2 automatic bids for the Big 12 and ACC, 1 automatic bid for the group of 5, and then 3 at-large bids. What could this mean for Auburn? It can mean a lot of things for the SEC. If this format comes to fruition, as it seems likely at the moment, although Greg Sankey said yesterday he did not necessarily have a favorite format right now. He even said the format that I just listed may not even be the most beneficial to the SEC, which I thought was interesting because it did seem this is the direction that we were headed. I think the Big Ten is in support of this model. So I still think in the end this is likely the model that we will get, but that's not a sure thing yet. However, I'm going to discuss it like it is. So, if this does happen, according to reports, according to Ross Dellinger and Yahoo Sports, who does a fantastic job covering all this, the SEC is likely to move to play-in games for playoff spots. So what do I mean by that? It means the SEC is likely to, again, this is all hypothetical, these are scenarios, these are not necessarily written in stone yet. But this is what is likely to occur if the SEC and the college football commissioner, we don't have commissioners, the conference commissioners, decide to move to a 16-team playoff. This is what is likely to occur for the SEC. You would have play-in games. The first team in the conference finishes first in the conference standings, and the second team that finishes in SEC conference standings will more than likely get on an automatic bid to the college football playoff. The other 4 teams would do a play-in style tournament. So you would have 3 versus 6 in your conference standings play each other, and 4 versus 5 in your conference standings play each other as essentially a play-in game for the college football playoff for those other 2 spots. So the top 2 would be based on your record during the regular season, and then you're playing for a play-in spot if you're in 3 through 6, and then if you win that game, you make it to the college football playoff. That is a possible scenario for the SEC. So, if you were to finish top 6 in the SEC conference, which we now know is up to, 16 teams, then you have a chance to go to the college football playoff by winning your playing game. This is something that the NBA has gone to, and other sports have as well. These play-in style games, it generates a lot of revenue. My opinion on it, I don't like it. Again, anything that puts the focus more on the postseason in college football versus the regular season, I don't like. And this puts a lot more focus on making college football a postseason sport when you talk about play-in games versus just letting the regular season results speak for themselves. I don't love it, but it is something that could happen in the near future. Another thing is the SEC could finally move to 9 games. We know the rest of college football plays 9 games. That's been a big focal point for other conferences arguing against the SEC, believing the SEC is weaker because they don't play 9 games, so forth and so on. If the SEC is guaranteed more spots in the college football playoff, if they feel that strength of schedule will be more properly weighted, then the SEC will likely go to 9 games. That's the reason they haven't. That is something that will be discussed in Destin this week. The reason the SEC hasn't moved to 9 games is because they didn't think strength of schedule being properly weighted, and they didn't want to be punished for playing another game and losing that game, and then a team from the Big 12 getting in and playing a lot less competition versus an SEC team that's 9-3, a 10-2 Big 12 team gets in, and the SEC, so we just played one less SEC game, theoretically again, and we were 10-2, then we'd be getting in over that Big 12 team. But if the SEC believes that strength of schedule will finally be properly weighted, there's more automatic bids for the SEC, they feel as if they can move ahead with a 9-game schedule, which in return would generate more revenue for the conference. And then finally, it could lead to bigger out-of-conference games, which I think this is one thing I do think would be really good for the sport. We know Auburn's traveling to Baylor this year to open up the season. I think that is really exciting and really good for college football. So more of that, more of those matchups. We know we'll have Texas versus Michigan this upcoming season, Alabama versus Florida State. And that's good for the sport. We need more of that. So that is a positive. But overall, 16-team playoff would be beneficial to Auburn. As much as I might not like it personally as a fan of college football, a 16-team playoff is going to be good for Auburn. I said a 12-team playoff would be good for Auburn. Despite my disagreement, despite my disliking of it, it gives more opportunity and therefore gives Auburn a greater chance of getting in. If you're talking about this possible play-in scenario that the SEC could go towards in a 16-team playoff, then you're talking about Auburn just having to finish in the top 6 in the SEC standings, which not easy, but certainly doable. And if Auburn can do that, then all of a sudden you have a chance to make it to the college football playoff by just winning one more game. And that's a big deal. So do I think that Auburn is going to be set up well for this upcoming era of collegiate athletics based on the way things seem to be trending right now? Absolutely, I do. As much as I might dislike it personally, from Auburn's standpoint, I think it's beneficial, which you can see why the SEC is pushing for it, because it would benefit their universities. I just don't think it's good for the greater good of college athletics and for college football, taking my Auburn bias out of it. However, I wanted to do that segment. I think it's enjoyable to talk through the hypotheticals. I think you all enjoyed those segments. I know I certainly do, and that's why I wanted to do it. However, there's still plenty to be decided. There is so much up in the air. The House settlement, as of 1:20 on this Tuesday afternoon, has still yet to be approved by the judge. We're just assuming it's going to be, yet it hasn't happened yet. A lot of things could blow everything up, and we could still be in a world of chaos for a lot longer. We don't know. This is just the way things seem to be trending right now, and that's why I wanted to do this segment, but still plenty of decisions need to be made, and plenty of conversation and plenty of news will continue to come out of Destin this week as the SEC administrators and coaches are down there meeting. I'm sure we'll have more to discuss on next week's show about what comes out of this week's meetings for those folks down there. Okay, now let's move on and roll on to our summer opponent preview. Excuse me as I take a sip of water there. Voice is getting a little raspy here. It's been a good while on that segment, but we'll keep it rolling. So Auburn will play Oklahoma in Week 4 of this season. I skipped the Ball State and South Alabama games. Those are Week 2 and Week 3. Certainly, Auburn can't look over any opponent, but for this segment this summer that we're doing for summer opponent preview, I skipped over it and went on to Oklahoma in Week 4. Auburn has to travel to Norman, Oklahoma in Week 4. The storylines, man, the storylines are magnificent for this game. You have two teams that enter this season with head coaches on the hot seat, if you will. If you want to call it that, some people aren't a fan of that, but it's true. Both these coaches, by either the national media or their own media or their own fans, enter the season on the hot seat. Both coaches have underperformed based on the standards of their programs last season, and for multiple seasons now. Brent Venables is entering year 4 as the head coach at Oklahoma. He is 22-17 overall. He had a really good season 2 years ago with 10 wins, but went backwards last season, winning only 6 games. Of course, we know Auburn's situation with Hugh Freeze entering year 3. So that makes it a big storyline. These are two sleeper teams as well this upcoming season. Two teams that have top 15, maybe even top 10 caliber talent rosters this upcoming season. Yet they've underachieved the last couple years, and therefore they're flying under the radar a little bit. But these are two sleeper teams. These are two popular picks by not just Auburn or Oklahoma media, but by national media to have big years. And if I had to predict, I would predict that one of them likely will. I think it's unlikely that both will, because every year we see talented rosters underperform. But these two rosters have the talent, if they play their full potential, to compete in the SEC this season and to compete for a college football playoff spot. That's not saying too much. These two teams have the talent to do that. Doesn't mean they will, but both have it. And you also have the storyline of Jackson Arnold returning to Norman, Oklahoma. We know things didn't go as planned there. He was the 5-star true freshman that came into Oklahoma. They essentially ran off Dylan Gabriel to Oregon for Jackson Arnold to take over at quarterback, and things just did not go well for a multitude of reasons that we've discussed on this show when he landed at Auburn. So it'll be a big deal. I'm sure it'll be emotional for him to return to Norman in front of those fans, but that makes it even more exciting. This is a game a lot of folks have circled, because if Auburn wins in Week 1 against Baylor, and if Oklahoma enters this game at 3-0 as well, this is a massive, massive game for both head coaches if both teams enter this game 3-0. Is a loss going to end the season for either coach? No, not necessarily. But man, this could be a huge jolt of momentum for whichever program comes out victorious in this one. So let's look at this Oklahoma team this upcoming season. Jackson Arnold's gone. Their offense has been completely revamped. They fired their offense coordinator, brought in the Washington State offense coordinator, and brought in the top quarterback in the transfer portal last cycle, at least in my eyes, in John Mateer from Washington State. An exceptional player. They need him, and they need this offense to be completely different. this upcoming season. Oklahoma was 113th in total offense last season. As I said before, there are a multitude of reasons for that. Jackson Arnold, yeah, he was one of them. Their offensive line also struggled mightily. They had major injury issues out at wide receiver, and their offensive line was really, really rough. So all of those kind of factored into Oklahoma's offense really struggling last season. But this year, they brought in John Mateer. They brought in Jaden Odd, if you remember that name. He was the California running back. He transferred from Cal to Oklahoma. So for the third year in a row, Auburn will face Jaden Odd. We know he's a very, very talented running back. Their wide receiver room should be improved this season. As they got healthier, they also brought in a transfer wide receiver. I don't know if it'll be necessarily in the upper half of SEC receiver rooms, but it has the potential to be pretty good this season. As for the defensive side of the ball, Oklahoma was really good defensively last season. That's the reason they were able to win the 6 games that they did, because their offense was barely good enough to win 3 games. So their defense was what helped them win and get up to that 6-point margin. Their defense was the reason they were able to beat Auburn and come back from a 21-10 deficit. That was a painful loss for Auburn, as many were last season. Was a game that Auburn likely should not have lost, although I don't love saying that. Oklahoma made a nice comeback, had the pick 6 late in that game, and ended up winning it 27-21, and they're going to bring back another really stout defense this year. Their defensive line could be one of the best in the SEC and one of the best in the country. Very, very talented in the front 7. They did lose a very key piece in Danny Stutzman at linebacker. He's gone off to the NFL, but they do have a couple new pieces there, as well as a returning linebacker that I'm sure will be solid. And their secondary returns. Most pieces did lose one guy in the secondary, but they did return a couple guys there. So overall, I don't expect much drop-off from their defense. For Oklahoma this season, it's going to come down to their offense. Is it improved? If their defense holds together and their offense improves just a little bit, this is a team that you're looking at that should at least win 8 games. If their offense improves a ton, then you're looking at a team that could possibly be a 10-win and a college football playoff team. However, Oklahoma, side note, does have an extremely, extremely difficult schedule, one of the toughest in the country. So that is an important thing to keep in mind if you're an Oklahoma fan. But just to give you an idea of what Auburn will be walking into in Norman in Week 4, this is an Oklahoma team that has the talent and that I expect to be much better than they were last year, and this is going to be a massive, massive game for both Hugh Freeze and Brent Venables in Week 4. Okay, moving on to Auburn basketball now. What's the latest news? Well, we are at 1:27 now on this Tuesday afternoon. Todd Pettiford has still not made a decision yet. The clock is ticking, and he will make a decision before tomorrow. He will make a decision by tomorrow, not before tomorrow necessarily. That is Wednesday. So if you're listening to this show, watching the show on Wednesday, and that is when the expectation is that Todd Pettiford will make a decision, because that is the deadline to keep his college eligibility. He has to make his decision by the end of the day on Wednesday. I don't know. I don't know what he's going to do. Justin Hokanson yesterday reported of Auburn Live on 3, reported that Todd Pettiford had workouts, I think, again today and tomorrow even, with a couple of NBA teams, and then he will make his final decision. I believe it could go either way. I would lean towards him coming back to Auburn, but I would not put in a prediction one way or the other. Certainly Auburn is hopeful that he will return, but you want what's best for Todd Pettiford. You want him to have a successful career in whatever path he ends up choosing, whether that's the NBA or coming back to Auburn and then going to the NBA. But certainly for Auburn's team next year, you certainly want Todd Pettiford to return. So that's what Auburn's waiting on. They're waiting on Todd Pettiford because his decision will affect what you do with the rest of the roster. And Auburn, we know, is still waiting and still looking to add another front court piece or two. Bruce Pearl talked about it, I believe, last week or even 2 weeks ago now, that they are waiting to get approval on a foreign player, and that hasn't happened yet, apparently. I don't know if there is cause for concern there. We'll see how that all plays out. We're still waiting any news on that to see if Auburn can add a player from overseas to this roster. And again, as we mentioned on the last couple shows, if Todd Pettiford does not return to Auburn, then Auburn has to go after another guard or two out there to try to replace him. No one is going to be able to replace the player that Todd Pettiford is. but you at least try to get someone as good as you can if Todd decides to stay in the NBA draft. So really, we're just in a waiting game. And by the time you're listening to this podcast, maybe Todd Pettiford has announced his decision one way or the other. That's the downside of recording a podcast, especially in this time of the year when decisions are being made. You record something, and then a few minutes later, it's irrelevant because the decision has been made. But as of Tuesday afternoon, no decision has been made by Todd Pettiford yet for Auburn. As for the basketball team overall in the roster, many of the guys have moved in this weekend or are moving in today, and they'll get going on their offseason workout program and really start to try to build some chemistry because, again, none of these guys really know each other. They're all going to have to meet each other, develop relationships, and that is going to be extremely important. What they do off the court this offseason will be just as important in my eyes as what they do on the court. When you have a team full of brand new players that don't have any chemistry yet together, building those relationships off the court is going to be extremely important and will go a long way in determining how successful this Auburn basketball team ends up being this upcoming season. I fully believe in that. And so I hope that they'll be able to bond and work hard and grow as a team this summer, and I'm sure they'll have fun doing it. Okay, let's get to it now. Auburn baseball will host a regional for the third time in the last 4 years this weekend at Plainsman Park. Auburn's the number 4 overall seed. This was a surprise. We've been talking for the last couple weeks. What did Auburn need to do to get a top 8 national seed? Which would mean that Auburn would get to host a regional and a super regional if Auburn is able to win their region. So that was the conversation. And we thought, okay, Auburn's probably going to be a number 7 or number 8 seed. Lo and behold, Auburn ended up being a number 4 seed, which, when you look at Auburn's resume, shouldn't have been surprising. Auburn had one of, if not the best resume in college baseball this season. Their tough non-conference schedule really paid off, and even though they had what you could call a letdown here in the last couple of games, losing the series in Oxford and then losing to Texas A&M in the first game of the SEC tournament, this was still a resume that was really strong and that had been built since February, and it wasn't all going to come crashing down because you slipped up a little bit at the end of the season. So Auburn has put themselves in a tremendous position to make another trip to Omaha. But it doesn't come easy. Nothing comes easy in college baseball. We know this, and they'll have to get through their regional first and foremost. But give Butch Thompson credit. Look, I know there has been plenty of criticism for Butch Thompson because of how last season went. Last season was a disaster. The pitching was atrocious. There were a lot of issues with that roster, and there were reasons for it. But you know what? Butch Thompson went to work, and he turned this program around. And Auburn had one of its best regular seasons in program history. And this is a team that's made history as being the only second time in program history Auburn's been a top 4 seed. And this is the only other time it was done was in 2003. Butch Thompson continues to cement himself, in my eyes, as one of the best coaches in not just Auburn baseball history, but in Auburn athletics history. He is phenomenal. He's an exceptional coach. Down years happen, but how you respond is what matters. And Butch Thompson and his staff did a fantastic job responding and putting together an excellent team. And this team has played with a chip on their shoulder all season long. They played with an edge that you love to see after a disappointing season. And you hope that you'll continue to see that now that Auburn is in a position to make it to Omaha. So who's in Auburn's regional? The number 2 seed is NC State, who went 33-19, 17-11 in the ACC, finished 4th in the Atlantic Coastal Conference this season. A team that's certainly capable of winning this regional. They can really hit. Their pitching lacks a little bit of this. They're a really good offensive team, and certainly a team that's capable of giving Auburn some issues, and a dangerous team to watch in this one. The number 3 seed in Auburn's regional is Stetson. They went 40-20 this season. They were second in the ASUN this year, 24-6. Winning 40 games, I don't care at what level, I don't care in what conference. Winning 40 games is not easy. This team knows how to win baseball games. They will not be an easy out. They'll play NC State in the first game of the regional on Friday afternoon. And then the winner of that game will play the winner of Auburn versus Central Connecticut State, who is the 4 seed in this region, who won their conference. They were 31-15, 23-7 this season. So certainly a workable region for Auburn. I think it was a big deal that Auburn was able to avoid any SEC teams in this regional. But that doesn't mean NC State or even Stetson would not be capable of coming out of this regional and advancing to the super regional. So Auburn has to be locked in, has to be focused, and they will be. Look, all eyes are on Omaha right now. Butch Thompson said yesterday 4 teams stand in Auburn's way of getting there. So what does Auburn need to do to win this regional and to advance to a super regional? I think Auburn just got to do what you've done all year, and that's play with a chip on your shoulder, play with the same intensity level that you play with, stay focused on the little things, and hit the ball like you've hit the ball all year. Auburn struggled a little bit in the Texas A&M game. Cold games happen. You have to bounce back and respond from this. This lineup is exceptional. This team can really, really hit. I expect that they will do so in this regional. The pitching is what gives me the most concern. It may not cost Auburn in the regionals. I don't know. Maybe it will. But that's what gives me the most concern. Sam Dutton hadn't pitched in a while. I am interested to see how Butch Thompson and this staff handle the rotation and the bullpen and all of that this weekend. Will they start with Cam Tilley, who started the Texas A&M game? Will they start Sam Dutton, who hasn't started a game in over a week now in the first game against Central Connecticut? I really am not sure. My guess would be they would probably hold Sam Dutton for that second game against either NC State or Stetson, assuming you get through Central Connecticut, but I could be wrong on that. We'll see. But even in Sam Dutton's last 2 starts have not been his best, so Auburn needs him at his best. If you're going to win a regional, if you're going to make it to Omaha, your pitchers have to be at their best, and your ace has to be at his best. You have to be able to count on him. I'm confident in Sam Dutton's ability and that he can get the job done, but he needs to get it back going for Auburn this weekend. That's going to be really important. As for who could start a potential Game 3 and Game 4, of course, you got Christian Chatterton, who I would assume will get the Game 3 start, but you never know. All hands on deck. You're going to have to use everybody more than likely to win this regional unless you're somehow able to go 3-0, which is possible, but not necessarily likely to have to end up playing 4 games to win it all. So all hands are on deck, whatever it takes just to get the job done. I cannot wait. Plainsman Park is going to be rocking this weekend. Auburn set attendance records all throughout this season for regular season series. I can't even begin to imagine what the numbers are going to end up being for this regional, and if Auburn advances to a super regional, what it could be for that as well. I know there'll be plenty of students coming back into town for it. I know there'll be plenty of just Auburn fans in general, and then of course you toss in 3 other teams that are coming. It's going to be a packed house, and it's going to be an electric environment. I cannot wait. Fully expect Auburn baseball to get the job done and to win this regional. Okay, to close out today's show, I did want to comment on Auburn golf. I mentioned at the start of the show just a little while ago, Auburn golf season came to an end in the quarterfinals in the NCAA championship tournament. What an incredible year. It is so hard to go back-to-back in any sport, and golf is no different. Auburn was looking to go back-to-back as national champions after winning it last season. Came in second in stroke play. This was match play that they were in now, facing off against Virginia, and they lost that 3-2. Tough go. It happens sometimes. It's just not your day, and that was the case for Auburn today. It seemed like hate that for them. Really was hoping that they would be able to go back-to-back. I did want to shout out Jackson Coyven, who did achieve his tour card, which means he can go on PGA Tour now. However, he is expected back next season for Auburn golf, and this is still overall a fairly young-ish team for Auburn. So they'll have another chance to try to run it back next season and try to get another national championship. But no matter what, this group had a really, really special season, and they should be extremely proud of what they accomplished. And I know Auburn certainly is. So congratulations to Auburn golf and a fantastic year. And with that, that will wrap us up for today's episode of Talkin' Tumors. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, there's going to be a lot of news that's going to come out this week pertaining to Auburn, to collegiate athletics. So just be on the lookout. I hate that we record this on a day where more news could come out, or more news could come out by the time you're listening to this. So I hate how that works sometimes. If it is big enough news pertaining to Auburn, we'll come back and we'll record something extra before next Tuesday. But if not, we'll be back with another episode next Tuesday of Talkin' Tumors. That is emphasizing that because that is the day that we will now be recording instead of Monday. So be on the lookout for episodes on Tuesday afternoons/evenings now instead of Mondays. That'll be our schedule moving forward this summer. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, make sure you're following me on social media at Talkin Tumors, and I'm sure I'll have plenty of commentary, even if we don't record a video on any news regarding Todd Pettiford or any other Auburn news before we're back with another episode next week. So until then, I'm Carson Horn, and this is Talkin Tumors. Thank you for listening to Talkin Tumors. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe and follow at Talkin Tumors on social media so you'll never miss an episode. War Eagle.